All right, so welcome everyone to the summer seashell drawing. This is a drawing of seashell and rocks. Let me just adjust my camera here. Want to thank the Village of Wrightstown Library so far for sponsoring this program. They pick out such great programs for me to do, and I'm grateful for it, and all of you for showing up. For those that are new, my name is Anita Thompson, and I own Art Venture Workshops. I am a mobile-based business where I do virtual and in-person programming for mostly libraries. I do other things on the side. I do corporate events. That's been a really fun thing that's been happening for about a year now. And other things too, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, all kinds of events. Anyway, so happy you're all.
Just came late. What size paper is it that you're using?
Oh, sure. It is. I'm using a basic 8.5 by 11, just computer paper, because it's easy for everyone to get. But it's a very small drawing. I have done it larger before, but I really want us to get into the detail, and it's hard to get into all of that detail I've found. So the smaller drawing is about 5 inches by about 4 inches. So it's a smaller drawing. I think a lot of you will find this to be a lot easier, especially that we're going to be, having to fit everything in and do the detail. So just to quickly go over the supplies that you need for those that have just joined, you need just a basic pencil with an eraser and also a blending tool. This is called a tortillon. If you don't have this, you can use a Q-tip. You can also use, you can rip off a piece of paper towel or a tissue, anything that you can blend with. And then the last thing you can blend with is your fingers. So any of those things will work. But we're just using a basic number 2 pencil for this drawing. Again, the size is about 5 inches down and 4 inches across. So if you want to make sort of your little rectangle here, and we're going to get started. Basically what I've done is we're going to go over the basic shapes first and then get into the detail. But in this drawing, because there are so many things to to fit into our rectangle, we want to make sure that everything is almost in the same place so that we can fit everything. All right, so I'm going to move my tiny drawing up. I actually think this one's tinier than the one I've done here. But so again, you want to make sure that you have your rectangle happening about 5 inches down and 4 inches across. I'm just going to draw mine really quickly here. Just kind of approximating. I guess I could kind of, yeah, that's about the size it is. Okay. And we're going to be drawing lightly rather than darker, but you will be seeing me creating it darker so that it'll show up on Zoom. Also, if you have any questions, you can put those in the chat. This is being recorded. Unless there's an emergency, absolutely, unmute. So with that, we're going to get started. I think I just have to have this be just a little bit longer here to get started. There we go. All right. So again, looking at our basic shapes, we're going to start in the top left corner, and I'm going to move my camera in slightly so that you can see it. I think I'm going to turn that light off so that you can see a little more detail at this point. So what we're going to start with is, again, our basic shapes. So we're looking at the top left here, and we see that there's some what's called negative space over here. Basically, that's space that is in between our objects. And that space can help us when we're trying to draw something, to determine how big or how small that space is among the other objects. So coming here, top left corner, we are going to be drawing sort of a curved line. This is for our first shell. And we're going to be going across the top first as we're drawing. So let me make this a little darker so you can see it. And then, so our next basic shape, and you can kind of do a little bit of detail right here as far as that shell. But we're looking at the space up at the top of our border, and then also the rest of our shapes. So we're continuing on here. This is another shell that's behind. And then we have a kind of flat but roundish shell right here going towards our top. And I'm going to make I realized I think I made this still a little bit too short. There we go. The other thing you can do, if you find that you need more room, you can just extend your rectangle. And welcome, Adrian. We've just started. We're doing the basic shapes up at the top of our page. And this is a very tiny drawing in the sense of it's about 5 inches down and 4 inches across. I'm just extending a bit of my lines here. All right, so now we've got the basic shapes at the top. We're going to go in for the clamshell. So taking a look at the clamshell, I'm just going to kind of show this to you up close. So our general shape here, this is actually rounded. So you see that line is rounded, and so are the other lines. So let's keep that in mind as we're creating this clamshell. So the outside, what we're going to do is the basic shape is this shape right here. It's kind of like a triangle at the top, the pointed part, and then this is sort of rounded. And as you can see, this part is the longest area of the shell. So we're going to keep that in mind as we're doing the basic shape here. So coming over here, it's about right here is the bottom portion of that shell. But so what we're going to do is we're just going to make that basic shape. It's a curve. And we're going to keep this as if it is triangular at this point. And here is our smallest part or our smallest point of that shell. So in order to kind of help you look at that, I'm going to make some of these lines right here for now, just so you can kind of get an idea of how we're doing this. And you'll have to adjust these lines, but basically, so this is rounded and it's going to be scalloped as you go around, but it gets smaller right there. So this is just a very basic shape. And then we're going to go in and we're going to create the individual lines. Let me move this up a bit for you all. So again, this is to get that basic shape. And then once you kind of get that basic shape, you can then go at the bottom of the pointed area and you can create the other shape that's happening for the shell. And that's going to look a little something like this. And again, we just kind of want to get those basic shapes in. I'm going to go closer now so that you can see more of the detail. So again, my shell is not perfect right now, but we want to get that basic shape in. And these shapes are smaller here, or I should say, it's shorter here, and then the shell expands right around this area, and then it goes back and starts to get smaller again too, because the shell is curved downward. Now we're going to leave it like this for now. We're just going to finish up here about our shapes. So we're going to add a curve here because this is a rock. So again, it's kind of coming from this area. And then we've got a shell that is curving right here, like so. And another curved line here in the corner that is going to be another shell. So right now, these are just lines that don't make sense. But we want to make sure we're keeping with that border up top. And then we're going to keep going. I'm actually going to move this one in so that you can really get used to the basic shapes here. Let me fold this over so that you can see the whole thing. Okay, so we're continuing on here. So see, we've got the top part finished. We're now going to go into the middle part. So we want to now extend this line towards the shell we just created. And again, we're probably going to come back and adjust a little of this, but we're just getting all of the rocks and the shells in place in the right positions. So now we're going to come over here and we're going to create the line or the curved line for the other rock. So that shape is going to come down from the left and then come and meet up with this shell. We're going to hop on over here to the right side because we're going to be drawing this stone right here. So you can tell it's not as round, but it starts off right here next to the shell and it gets pointy in a way right over here, but we still have some space in between our paper. So see, there's still some space right there. And then we come back and we kind of almost have like a little bit of a rounded diamond shape. And then it goes back again towards the edge of our paper. I have to make mine a little bit lower here. We'll find out as we continue onward, and that's where you can adjust everything. Okay, so now we're going to scoot back over here to the left. And we're going to come over here and we're going to create the rock shape that's happening over here. We still have some space in between. I'm going to erase some of these lines as to not confuse you. And you can do the same thing. If you have multiple lines that you've created, which are really called construction lines, those are lines that help you get the shape correct. You can go ahead and start to erase some of those now. You may make more as we go on, but it's okay. So we're over here. You're now going to go a little bit straight for the next rock. And here at the left, you're going to go down just a little bit and then go over for now. because we have another rock coming in from here. And it's shaped a bit like this and rounded a little here at the bottom. Everyone okay so far? Not going too fast? Awesome.
All good.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Michael. Okay, so now we have our shell, which is our really big part of the drawing. Welcome, Sandra. Oh, she may not be on yet. We're now going to go into our shell. So coming from here, we have the line from the shell, the part that's a little more elongated. And we've got a bit of a point to it going towards the left side of our paper here. And this is the sort of the inside area of the shell that's kind of going up and curving around. So you can just make kind of a squiggly line for now like that. And what the shell does at this point is it starts to now go into more of the curved area of the actual shell. And it's going to extend to the right side. So right here, you should have some space in between this rock and the shell. I'm realizing mine has to kind of come down a little bit, like so. And again, this is where you kind of start to adjust some things. Sometimes, like what I'm doing right now, is I'm just adjusting my side to make it a little bit bigger, just so I have a little more room. Okay, so we go like this. And now we're going to make the sort of step that happens right here. So as you can see, the area comes outward, but then it's almost like stairs, you know? This part goes a little smaller in more, then this one goes in even more, and then more until we get to our point. So here's our first point of it, or the second kind of step area. And you can kind of curve it a little bit as you're going towards the edge. Let me move my paper over so you can actually see. Go up just a little bit. There we go. Now I'm going to create the other part, and then finally we have our point. And as you can see, I'm getting dangerously close to my edge, so I'm just going to extend that a little more. So right here, we have our point, our pointed area. Now we still have to go to the other part of the shell. So we're going to come back down here to the left, so that way we can create the part of the shell that's sort of sticking out with the bump, because this is the open part of the shell from here to the bottom. So what you can do is start to extend this line and then come back over. And this shape is slightly curved, but then it starts to kind of even out a little bit here to come meet up with the other side. And there's a bit of a dent right here. And then a bump. You really want to make sure to kind of get this indent here and then the bump. So right here, you may have to be playing around with, it's a little thicker here. Because see, that will create your shape of your shell. Now you want to look over here, and we're going to put the top part of it on. It goes like this. I'm going to add a little more thickness over here. And then we're finally going to finish up with the top section right over here. Okay, so for now, we're kind of just making lines to separate the different sections of the shell. So this sort of, stepping part of these. So I'm going to draw this kind of like, I think of it as a tiered cake, like different levels of cake. So we're drawing those shapes like so. And I had to kind of erase and redraw the pointed part right here to the left. I want this to be a little bit smaller. So just erasing to make sure that it's not too big, that this comes down looking a bit like a step, and we've got our shape. Now, erasing any lines that don't make sense, we're going to now come back over here to the left and finish up with our areas over here. So here is our one rock, right? And we've got another one coming into the bottom left of our drawing. So we've got a curve here, and this rock is on top of this one that we drew. And you're going to curve those lines and then just erase the lines that don't make sense. And then finally, you're going to go underneath, and this is where we start to really complete the drawing in the sense of having everything finally in about the proper places. So here we go under here. We have a slight curve. You're going to bend toward your bottom left corner and back. Right down here, here's another curve downward because that's a rock. So right here, we're now just getting in the shapes at the bottom. So we have a shape coming here at the top, down, and then towards our bottom. I'm realizing I have to make my bottom a little bit longer too. I probably should have measured this. So there we go. And then we finally have the rock here at the bottom of our paper in the middle. And that is kind of has two bumps and downward like so. Now we're just finishing up here at the bottom. We're continuing on here. Right over here, there is another rock that is a little bit on top of this one. And this is going to go up and over, extending towards our right bottom corner. But you still should have a little bit of room in between. Now, again, if it doesn't work out that you don't, that's okay. Your rock is just a little bit differently shaped. It's all right. And now we're just going to fill in these areas over here. So we've got curved line here because of a rock. And this will all make a lot more sense once we start our shading. Right now, it's just a group of lines for the most part. Let me just double check. It looks like I lost somebody, but maybe they meant to leave. Okay. All right. So finally here, we've got this one. We've got a smaller rock here coming from underneath our fancy conch shell here. And then this part is a little more pointed. Hits about right here. And then we have a little bit of a curve coming right near where the tip of our conch is, but on the right. And I have to make this rock a little bit bigger because it should extend towards the edge a bit more. So I'm just going to fix that shape like so. And then we have a little bit of a curve over here because that's another rock as well. And then we're finally just going to create a curve for the shell at the top here and here. And so far, that is our basic drawing. And now we have to get into fixing our clamshell here as well. And then we're going to start with the details. I'll talk a little bit about line quality. And, getting into the other details that we'll be adding, the light and the darkness of using our pencil, along with our shading tool, whatever that tool you're using is. So let's give our attention now to our clamshell so that we can go into more detail. So we have the basic shape now, and we're going to go here to the left side. I'm going to zoom in quite a bit here. And basically, if you take a look at the right side here, show you the finished one. Basically, we start off with everything coming to a point, or like I was saying, kind of like, the point of a triangle. It curves, and it even starts to curve right here. All of these lines, all of these parts of the shell are coming from this point for the most part, especially on the left. So here is our outside part. Again, we want to curve it and then go back down. And this time we're going to add a line that goes like this at the end. So here's what's going to happen for each part as we're drawing towards this end of the seashell. We come back always to this center, extend our line. Remember, your line is curving. So almost like think of it as it's, kind of curving like this. So curve, go to the end here. And then this one, you're going to kind of make a line that's kind of curvy towards that end. And then you're going to come back and make the next line. You're staying really close to the other line that you drew. These are very close. And it gets even closer as you get towards the end. That's how you're going to get that shape. So I'll show you that again. So again, you're working with two sides of, you know, the left side here. And then as you get closer to the right and the edge, or I should say the origin of where all those lines are coming from in the shell, you're going to get closer together. That's what's going to give you that shell shape. So we're going to do it again. Again, coming from here, staying really close. And you can even take your pencil like what I'm doing and do short strokes in order to shape those lines. Now you're going to go again. And this time, you're going to go a little bit further out. And you may have to, or I know you will, you'll have to kind of erase the edges a little bit of what you've already created in order to make them look like they're kind of in a wavy way. So here I'm going to extend this one a little bit farther out than that one. And then the next one, I'm going to go out a little more toward the edge. And again, now I'm going to go back. Again, getting really tight towards the edge and then repeating that pattern for the rest. So here's another one. But what you're going to start to see is the shape at the end of each section. This line curves out like a bump. And then what we'll do in the middle of each of those is that's when we create the shadow. So here's the next bump. Again, I'm sticking with that curve, getting tighter over here. Now I'm going to keep coming out again. Here's the next one. And keep going until, you know, yours might be a little bit smaller than mine or bigger than mine, and that's okay. But you then want to continue that all the way till you get to the edge. And you're going to have, or should have, it being scalloped looking along the edge. And if you have to add one or two more of those scalloped edges, you can just add on now. But when you finally get to the end, you can then fix the portion that's flatter on the shell where everything's coming from. So I'm doing that right now. I'm going to make this darker so you can see. So it's going to look like this. Just fix that line. I'm going to show this up close. As you can see, the scalloped edges kind of go in and out. We're going to soften everything with our shading tool in a second, because that's going to be our first layer of everything. Softening and then adding darker areas, all of that. So we want to grab our shading tool at this point. And we're going to soften everything in the sense of, you're going to start off along the edge of all of your rocks and kind of smooth all of the edges, and you can bring that shading into each of the rocks. So we're starting off with the rocks and the shells around this big shell. And you're just going to soften up all of your lines. So that's our first, kind of our first stage. Softening up all of our lines. And it's okay if you go inside the rocks with your shading, because we're also going to be using our eraser afterward, and also making some of these parts, obviously, with different kinds of shading. So I'm also now going along the conch shell here and also just softening up those lines. So it's almost like, we've created the lines, now we're just softening them, and then we're going to start adding shading and darker lines. So we're doing everything for now right around the clamshell for now. So the clamshell should be the thing that looks like, your lines are the hardest. And then once you do that, you're going to take your pencil and we're going to go to the first shell right here. So first shell being here, there's very fine lines in here, shading, but we're going to start off here and we're going to make a line, a light line. And then right here, we're going to make that a little bit darker with our shading. So we're going to start adding the detail. And then once we do that, we're going to take our pencil and we're going to make really light lines throughout this area at the top. We're kind of going around in very light lined circles, but going into this section. So stopping at this line for the first part. So going really light. We're basically making texture. And then you can start to add some shading here as we're getting towards the bottom portion of this sand dollar. And then when you come over here to the right, you're doing some shading back and forth, really light shading with your pencil. I'm just going to show this up close so you can get an idea there. I think those lines are called striations, I think. I'm not sure. Yeah. Oh, good. Roseanne's shaking her head. I must be onto something. Good. So funny. Once you do that, we're going to then start to do some of the shadowing right outside of our shell here and right along it. So again, we did this. We're not completely finished with it. You can go back and add a little bit darker line here, or shading, I should say. I'm going to go in really close. Let me see if the light, yeah, you know what? It's time to put the light on now. It wasn't as dark, it's starting to get a little darker here. So I went back here, added some more subtle shading. But now we're going to go around this edge and we're going to create some shadowing on top of the sand dollar, but it's around this shell. So I'm just getting lines and shading. right along the edge here, and then starting to go against the edge of the clamshell. So I'm just kind of taking my pencil and rocking it back and forth very lightly. So your shading should start to look like that. It's kind of subtle right now. We'll go back and, add some darker lines as we go, but we want to get the basic shading down first for everything. Now, once we do that, we're now going to come up here to the rock over here, and we're going to shade very lightly from left to right the whole area of that rock. That's our first part. Once you do that, you're going to come over here and you're going to add an outline to this part of the rock. And then you're going to slightly outline around the edge here. And you're going to start to add some very subtle details at first. So we're going to add some kind of shaded spots, like right here. And then once we do that, we're going to start shading darker here in this corner and here on the left, because this rock would have a shadow in this area because it's partially covered, or actually it's mostly covered, really, by everything that's around it. And then you're going to shade right in this area a little bit lighter. And you're going to shade in this corner and then going around like this. I'm going to show this up close. Also, after that initial shading, you can start to add some hatching lines. So by hatching, basically single lines going in different directions to create shading. They're very subtle. So it's almost like instead of doing the shading all together in one section, so see, you can kind of see it there. That's funny. Doesn't my rock look like it has a face on it? It's like, look at the two eyes, the mouth. What did I do there? That's not what my original looked like. All right, let's see. There we go. Got to add some more. There we go. Actually, I kind of like it. I'm going to leave the face. Why not? But basically doing a combination of that hatching, and then you're going to come over here and you're going to make this line really dark. And over here. And that's going to bring us into our next shell, which again, it's a lot of subtle shading, but first we want to add some of the striations here, striation lines right here, and one right here. And some right here. So we're going to do this repeat process of doing very light shading and then detail. So, and there's also a little bit of a dot right here. And then you're going to shade the whole thing very lightly. And then once you do that, you're going to shade around the edge of the section here. But inside, you're going to just shade that a little bit darker. There's a little bit darker there. And then in this corner, where it's hitting where the shell is, you want to shade kind of like in a rounded way, like here. And then here. Lots of subtleness, but the texture, you're now starting to create texture with your shells and your rocks. Now, once you do that, you're going to go in the middle here. This is what's called negative space. There's a rock under here, but it's dark because everything's on top of it. So you want to outline this shape by pressing on your pencil and then filling it in. And you're making it almost black, really dark. And once you do that, the other shell and everything else is going to really pop. So now once we do that, we're going to come back over here. We're going to outline this shell. So everything in this really gets, a lot of it gets outlined. So let's outline this. Outline this one. And same thing with this one. We're going to start to add some little shaded details here, little spots. But this one, we're going to start shading sort of in circles. So we first start to take our pencil and just add lightly circular lines after we added some of those details. And then we're going to shade on top a little bit darker in these sections that I'm going to show you. So here. We have some darker shading here. And then we've got more shading in the rest of it, but you want to go a little bit lighter in the rest. Kind of like you're blending with your pencil. Now, if you find it hard to do very light lines, you can switch to your tortillon or your Q-tip, and you can blend this a little more. We're going to go back in and smooth everything out one more time anyway. But then the next thing you want to do is now outline your next shell, which is this one. And you're going to go in and darkly outline that. And all of a sudden, it should look like it's starting to kind of come off the page a little bit. Once you darkly outline it, you then want to shade around it slightly lighter, a slightly lighter shade than you just did. So your outline should be dark, right? Almost black. It's like you're pressing on the pencil. And then around it, you kind of want to shade dark, but lighter than what you did. I'm going to just show that up close. So it should kind of look like that. So you have an edge and then kind of lighter shading, but it's going to make it look like that is a shadow, because shadows are not solid. They are transparent. And then you're going to go back up onto your rock and you're going to create a curved edge because this is a three-dimensional object. And underneath it, you're going to shade underneath a little bit. And then going on top, you're going to shade with, again, curved lines. And then a little more solid. With another very dainty curved line here. And you can add some little more shading that's a little darker right in this left corner of the rock. And what that's going to do is that's going to make it look three-dimensional. I'm going to show that up close. We're going to keep going here. So again, we're going around the main two shells for now, and then we'll go back to those because everything else is pretty much the same. So getting back over here to the left, again, you're going to trace that rock. And then to the left of it, you're going to hard trace the next rock. And now the next one. So right now we're going to hard trace a lot of these rocks now that we have the shapes in. So basically you're outlining right here, a little bit of hard shading right along the edge of the conch shell. We're sticking here to the left side. Hard trace again with a little bit of a shadow. We're going to hard trace on top of the rock here where the pointy part of the shell is right next to or right on top of that rock. And then hard trace again. This rock coming on the left. And basically, like I mentioned, all of these lines here are now going to be, you know, around the conch shell. You want to go back and make them darker and a little thicker. So you're just going to work your way around. You can now, you know, define those shapes of those rocks. So all of those rocks should now have thick lines separating them. You're also going to come back over here to the top left corner where we started to kind of outline the sand dollar, but we didn't outline the bottom part. So now we're going to go back and you're going to do that. And then coming back over to the sand dollar, right underneath the rock to the left, which is this area, you're going to start shading, going from a dark area here in the corner. And then you're going to be doing those round lines again as you're shading and going outward to the left. And it should be getting a little bit lighter as you get toward the left side of the page, I should say. And then you're going to go back and just shade a little bit darker with your pencil in this area. So you should just be smoothing it out now with your pencil by just going over it again. So I'm going to show that up close. And that's creating depth. Just adjust my camera there. And now we're going to go into the next rock on the left side here, but going towards our shell. And we're going to rock back and forth with our pencil in curved lines going from left to right. So I'm making really thin, light shaded lines like so. That's our first layer there. So really light. It's very subtle drawing, lots of subtle shading until we get into the separation of the rocks and the shells where we go darker. Now, what we're going to do, we have that shading. We're now going to go a little bit darker here along the edge outside of the shell because there would be a shadow of that shell. So you're going to kind of shade around the points. And then coming from the center here, you're going to shade a little darker too. Not real dark until you get underneath here the rock, because you're thinking this rock is three-dimensional, and the darkest part would be right here and along the edge. And then you can start to add some kind of dark spots by taking your pencil and kind of shading in sort of a circular fashion, but leaving part of the paper white too as you're doing it. So what I'm doing is I'm rotating my pencil as I'm shading, but I'm kind of going in circles, or I should say more like ovals. So that you get this sort of texture. So you can kind of see the lightly shaded ovals there. Parts of them are a little darker. And it's just going to give you that texture. We're going to continue now onto the left over here, because these are some simple, again, it's kind of simple rocks. You're going to, again, you're kind of going back and forth lightly with your pencil, shading until you get to this bottom part here, where this section, you go a little darker for the shadow. And then on the left side, you're going to add a section where it's a little bit darker shaded. So like right, kind of like this shape right here. And then when you're done that, you can sort of add kind of some little shaded areas of circular, how we do the circular shading. But then right around where the other rock is kind of sitting on top of it, you're going to get a little bit darker shading there. We're still sticking here with the left side. And again, we've got this rock to shade. It's kind of a little bit darker here at the bottom. And this rock is mostly white. So we just kind of want to take our pencil and lightly make those curved lines. On the rock. Like so, but we're leaving this spot, these two kind of spots, a little bit lighter. But then you do want to add some shading over here in this section of the rock. because that would be the area that is underneath your shell. Now working the same way here. We basically have some medium shading on this rock, just with our lines of our pencil. We also get a little darker right here in the corner of the rock. So as you can see, I kind of go back and forth over the area with my pencil. And then this part in between the shell and the rock, same thing, but it's a little bit darker shading right next to, or I should say kind of underneath your conch shell. This is still on the rock. And then it gets a little bit lighter. So you can just shade with your pencil underneath that. And we're getting around towards the end of our drawing here. I know it's a lot of shading. Again, we're going around here. We're going to create shading underneath our conch shell. That's like a medium shading. You can outline the edge of the conch shell. Then you're going to go really light for the rest of that rock. This is just with your pencil. Just going to go really light. Until you get to the next edge of the bottom rock here, and you want to add some medium shading around the border of it. And then going a little bit of shading inside that rock, but leaving the white of the paper. So see, our lines create the texture and the shading. And remember, our darker spots are in the corners here where the rocks meet. So you can go back on this one and add some darker shading. All right, working our way around. Same thing, you're going to go underneath the conch. We're now going, underneath the conch, and now we're going to retrace the conch area, kind of dark, and then you're going to kind of shade a little bit darker along the edge of it, along all of the rocks. So you're just going to create like a shadow by shading with your pencil along the outside of your conch shape, right on top of the rest of the rocks. So it's going to look like it kind of has a shadow underneath, because it does. And I'm just going to show this up close. And finally adding shading to the rest of these rocks. We have medium shading happening in this corner of the rock. And on this side of the rock too. I've created kind of like a circular shape here of shading. So I've just, taken my pencil, kind of created this imaginary border that's circular so that I can shade there. And then I'm going to go back and make the lines in between the rock darker by re-outlining. Because sometimes when you're shading, you actually lose the darkness. And the rock at the bottom right, going to go really light quickly on the shading, but you're going to leave the white of the paper at the bottom left of the rock. I'm just going to show you what I mean. See how I left the white of the paper there? I just didn't shade there. That's going to give that rock a sense of, that light is shining on it. And then you're going to go back and add some scratchy medium shading to the right side of that rock. So I'm going to show that too. See, I just went right back on that rock. Did some scratchy shading from left to right to define that area. And then right around it in the corner, going to shade a little bit dark in this section and right around the rock as if we're creating a shadow, because we are. We're almost like outlining it. And then the white part, you're just going to lightly fill in with your pencil. And are we good with another 5 minutes, Karen, and everybody else? Are we okay with that?
I think we're good. We
Awesome.
usually know that when the creative juices stop, they stop. So
They stop. That's right.
keep going. If you have to leave, we'll get this to you soon.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. All right. So finishing up here. Here we are on this rock. We have the shaded area that we started. And you want to just deepen that a little bit right here and extend that shape out like this into a curve. So I'll say that again. We kind of started to shade right around here as I mentioned shading around the edge of the conch. And you want to deepen that a little bit and then add kind of like a little curve. And you're going to add another curved area right down here. So again, I just take my pencil, I create a light curve, and then I fill in that curve with shading. And then I'm going to go on the rest of the rock and lightly add, again, sort of the shaded circular areas toward the shadow, like kind of stuck on the shadow. Oval. I always say circular. They're really kind of going in ovals. And I'm just going to show that up close. That's what that rock should look like. And then our final shading around everything is this last bit where we're going to create a shape like this that's shaded. We're going to add some 2 dark spots that are shaded right underneath this rock, like so. And then we're going to go back in with light curved lines, like so. I'm just going to show this up close. And then our final part around here is we're just going to go back and just add a little bit darker of the shadow on either side of that rock. And a little bit darker on this curved part of the rock. And then we're finally going to shade the clamshell and the conch shell as our finishers. So with this, we're finally going to grab our tortillon, and you're going to shade over the lines that you created for the separated portions of the clamshell. And you can shade towards the bottom too, meaning as well. And then also on the outside, on top of this rock area that's pretty big, you're going to take your tortillon and you're going to shade along the edge and then sort of around the rock, leaving the middle area the white of the paper a little bit. So, and I'll just kind of show this up close. So you see how it's whiter there, whiter there. And then going in now for the final details on our clamshell. We go, and now we're going to very lightly shade from left to right. And let me go really close in so you can see that detail. In between, so right here, I'm going to shade up and down along that line. And you're going to do the same thing at the bottom portion of each of those sections towards the line, like up against it. And this can be a fast thing, like you're kind of scribbling. And then as you get toward the center, you can actually scribble on top of the lines that you've created, because that's going to make it look like that shading is on each side of those sections. So again, this shouldn't be like something that's, that takes a whole lot of time. It's just kind of detailed. What you're doing is we're creating a shadow still, even though we defined those shapes. I'm just going to show this up close. This is what this should kind of start to look like. And then very lightly, you can lightly go on each section with your pencil kind of in the middle of each and create very light curved lines so that the shading that you just did doesn't look so severe. It's going to force your eye to look like, you know, there's another level of shading there. And when you are done with that, you can then go back in and make some of those separated lines, especially towards the bottom edge of where the shell is coming out of, the pointed part. You're going to go back in and you're going to darken up a portion of each of that line. And our last part is going to be our conch. One more thing about the shading right around our clamshell. We do want to shade a little bit darker, again, right around it. And then on the background where that rock is, so you can see where I'm kind of shading. I'm shading on the right side of that rock. So these are the darker areas where I'm shading on the rock. Kind of going around with the shading and leaving, again, the center left, kind of the white of the paper. Going back and then just adding a little darker. And you can add some very light lines. Oh my God, Michael, that looks amazing. Wow. Holy jambalaya. I have no idea why I just said that.
It's all because of you, Pump.
I don't know. You did the work. That looks incredible. Look at that conch shell too. Wow.
Sand dollars are my favorite. I love sand dollars since I was a little boy, like down in San Antonio on Padre Island, and just love the sand dollars. So just love the whole picture tonight. Fantastic.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. I like sand dollars too, but I can never find them. I feel like they're hard to find. I don't know. Maybe that's just my experience.
Okay, Gulf of Mexico, they're much more prevalent.
Gotcha. Gotcha. I love that. So here's our final part here, where we add darker shading right along the edge of the separation of the conch shell. And we create a darker shaded curved line there. And then we just kind of start to create some shaded areas or sections on the inside of that shell that's exposed to us. We have some very subtle shading, but, you know, kind of shapes that are, some of them are a little bit round, you know, like when you see a conch shell and you look at all the detail. It's really beautiful. And when you get into the top area, You know, all of this is just very subtle shading. And then going just a little bit darker in some of those areas, but especially behind the shells, so that it really gives you that impression, you know, that there's light on it, but all the shadowing. And so then it's really just taking your pencil afterward and just shading from light to medium and then a little bit dark with your pencil. Again, if you can't get that subtle tone with your pencil, you can use your tortillon to make it, you know, more, to make it more subtle. And then the last portion of this drawing is you then want to take your eraser and you're going to go on top of the rocks and the sand dollar, and you're going to just quickly erase away, just, you know, using your pencil in some parts of the shells and the rocks to create a bit of lightness in those areas. So I'm just taking my pencil, you know, and you can see me lifting it up periodically and just taking away some of the shading marks, because guaranteed, you know, this kind of drawing gets very shaded and we need to add some light back into it, and we add more texture even by taking away using our eraser. And you can also then add in, you know, the dark lines around, you know, as we did originally around our rocks and our shells. And then just erasing along the edges and wiping it off. And that's our summer shell drawing. And I'm going to remove my spotlight and stop the recording.